Under the scorching sun of Texas, traffic on Highway 83 was moving slowly. But this time, it wasn't an accident that brought the cars to a halt. Something smaller, wilder, had taken over the road. A tiny bobcat kitten. It stood trembling on the median, refusing to retreat, seemingly desperate to attract human attention. Officer Sarah Winters, an 11-year veteran of the Texas Department of Public Safety, had seen her share of strange incidents. But this one was different. As she arrived at the scene, she immediately noticed the unusual behavior of the animal. Most wild creatures fled from humans in traffic, but this one stubbornly held its ground. "There's a baby bobcat on the road," reported a man in a faded Dallas Cowboys t-shirt. "It's been trying to cross for 20 minutes but keeps retreating. A semi almost crashed trying to avoid it." Sarah approached and realized something was off with the animal. She grabbed her binoculars and spotted something unexpected. A small metallic device attached to its hind leg, marked with a blue tag. Her instincts told her there was more to this. Within 20 minutes, Dr. Stephen Mitchell, an experienced wildlife biologist from the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, arrived. He examined the device through his binoculars and frowned. "That's not one of our tags," he said gravely. "It looks like an emergency locator beacon, the kind given to hikers." Sarah's eyes narrowed. Why would a bobcat be wearing a hiker's beacon? Stephen was already making calls. Minutes later, he returned with troubling news. An experienced hiker, Robert Whitley, had been missing since yesterday in Fortress Ridge State Park. The number on the tag matched his campsite registration. Sarah and Stephen exchanged glances. The implication was unsettling. Somehow, this bobcat was connected to the missing person case. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories like this. Then, something remarkable happened. The animal let out an urgent sound, turned, and began slowly walking toward the woods. It paused, looked back at them, and waited. "I think it wants us to follow," Stephen said quietly. Sarah knew she had to make a decision. "I'll follow it. If Robert's injured, we could save valuable time." "I'm coming with you," Stephen said firmly. "If he needs medical help, we'll have a better chance together." Sarah radioed her dispatch. "Possible missing person case linked to a wildlife incident. Dr. Mitchell and I are pursuing. Request backup on standby." "Understood, Officer Winters. Search and rescue units are on alert, awaiting your confirmation." The bobcat kitten, now nicknamed Nova by Sarah, trotted ahead but stayed within sight. The first stretch of the forest was dense and dark, but Nova led them confidently along a narrow, barely visible path. The trees cast long shadows and the sounds of the highway faded behind them. Sarah felt her tension rise. Would they make it in time? Was Robert even alive? "Looks like she's taking us straight there," Stephen noted, bending down to examine the ground. "Fresh boot prints here and over there. A paw print, but not from a human. See that? A large paw print, maybe from another predator." Sarah followed his gaze. "A coyote or a cougar?" Stephen shook his head. "Coyotes are common here, but this looks bigger. If Robert's injured, he'd be easy prey. We need to hurry." Nova made another sound, louder this time, as if urging them on. She moved faster, and Sarah and Stephen broke into a jog. They were deep in the woods now, and the terrain grew rougher. Branches whipped against their clothes, and the ground became steeper. Suddenly, Nova stopped abruptly. Sarah halted, pulled out her flashlight, and shone it ahead. The ground was disturbed, signs of a struggle, broken branches, flattened grass, and something that glinted reddish in the dark. "This doesn't look good," Stephen said grimly. "If that's blood, we need to find him fast." Sarah nodded, her heart pounding. Every second counted. Nova moved again, this time more cautiously, leading them to the edge of a small ravine. She made another urgent sound. Sarah stepped forward, shining her light down, and held her breath. There, hidden beneath a fallen tree, was a figure. A man, motionless, but with faint signs of life. "Robert!" Stephen called out. A weak groan answered. He was alive, but in what condition? Sarah immediately grabbed her radio. "We found the missing person. He's injured and trapped. Request immediate medical evacuation. Our position is approximately 1 mile east of Highway 83, mile marker 143. The response came promptly. "Understood, Officer Winters. A rescue team is en route. ETA 45 minutes. Hold your position." Sarah looked at Stephen. We can't just wait. He needs water and first aid. Can you assess how bad it is? Stephen nodded, dropping his backpack and checking the stability of the ravine. We need to be careful. The ground looks loose. Together they carefully climbed down the slope. Branches cracked under their boots, and loose rocks tumbled. Nova followed with surprising agility, staying close. When they reached Robert, he slowly opened his eyes. A faint smile crossed his face as he saw Nova. Good girl, he whispered hoarsely. Sarah knelt beside him and offered her water bottle. Here, take a sip. We're here to get you out. He took a small sip before speaking weakly. Tree, trapped. Can't move my leg. It's numb. Stephen quickly examined him. Open fracture on the right shin. He's lost a lot of blood, but it doesn't look life-threatening. We need to relieve the pressure, but we can't rush it. Sarah radioed again. This is Winters. Victim has an open fracture on the right leg. Severe dehydration, but responsive. We need medical assistance urgently. Confirm ETA for rescue team. Confirmed, officer. Approximately 35 minutes. Sarah clenched her teeth. We need to stabilize him as much as we can to keep him going until then. Stephen pulled out bandages from his pack and began tending to Robert's wound. Nova stayed by Robert's side, watching every move intently, as if instinctively understanding that her human needed help. What happened? Sarah asked as they worked to stabilize his leg with a makeshift splint. Robert swallowed hard. I was tracking Nova. She was about to be released back into the wild. Then a storm hit. Lightning struck nearby, and Nova bolted. I followed her, but the tree fell, and I got trapped. Couldn't reach my emergency beacon, so I attached it to Nova's harness, hoping she'd get help. Sarah was impressed. You trusted her to save you? Robert smiled weakly. Not exactly. I just knew she'd learned that humans can help, so I hoped she'd find a road and someone would notice. Stephen looked at him with admiration. And she did. She walked right into traffic to get attention. If she hadn't been so persistent, we wouldn't have found you. The minutes dragged on painfully. Sarah maintained radio contact while Stephen kept Robert as stable as possible. Nova eventually lay down beside Robert as if to comfort him. Then finally the sound of rotor blades echoed in the distance. Sarah grabbed her radio. Rescue team in sight. We're ready for evacuation. The next few minutes were a blur of activity. A medical team rappelled down, stabilized Robert further, and prepared him for transport. Nova didn't leave his side until the rescuers carefully loaded him onto a stretcher. Robert tried to sit up. Nova, who's taking care of her? Stephen stepped forward. I'll look after her until you're back on your feet. Promise. Robert looked relieved before exhaustion overtook him. As the helicopter lifted off and disappeared into the sky, Nova stood watching, her golden eyes filled with concern. Sarah gently placed a hand on her back. Don't worry, girl. He'll be back, and you saved him. Nova nuzzled against Sarah's leg for a moment, a sign of trust, before turning her gaze back to the sky. This little bobcat had done something incredible, and Sarah knew this story wasn't over yet. 3 weeks had passed since Robert Whitley's rescue. His story had made national headlines. Man survives thanks to a bobcat. While Robert recovered in the hospital, Nova was temporarily placed under the care of Dr. Stephen Mitchell. She was now at the Austin Wildlife Rehabilitation Center in a protected environment. But the question remained, what would happen to Nova? Sarah had thought often about the brave bobcat kitten in the past weeks, so she volunteered to visit Robert as part of a community outreach program. On a sunny afternoon, she drove to the sprawling grounds of the rehabilitation center, where she was greeted by a young volunteer. You'll find Robert inside, Officer Winters. He's been looking forward to seeing you. Sarah entered a sunlit room where Robert sat in a wheelchair, his casted leg propped up. When he saw her, he smiled. Officer Winters, it's good to finally meet you under better circumstances. Last time, I wasn't exactly at my best. Sarah laughed. Call me Sarah, and you handled a broken leg better than some people handle a paper cut. Adrenaline is a wonderful thing. Robert joked, but you know what's even better? Knowing Nova made it. How is she? Sarah sat across from him. I heard she's settling in well. Stephen even comes by twice a week to check on her. Robert nodded. He's fascinated by her. We all are. Her behavior challenges a lot of what we thought about rehabilitating wildcats. Come on, I'll show you something. He wheeled himself to a door leading to a large enclosure, where Dr. Stephen Mitchell was already waiting. Sarah, perfect timing, were observing Nova during her training. Sarah stepped closer to the enclosure. The young bobcat moved with remarkable grace. She had grown stronger, her fur gleaming in the sun, her golden eyes scanning her surroundings. When she saw Sarah, she paused, then slowly approached. "Does she remember me?" Sarah asked, amazed. Robert and Stephen exchanged a glance. "It seems so," Robert said. "That's extremely unusual. Bobcats don't typically distinguish between humans, but Nova's different. Her ability to navigate between wild instincts and human interaction is unique." Sarah watched, fascinated, as Nova came to the fence and made soft sounds. "What happens to her now?" Robert sighed. "That's a question we've been thinking about a lot. Normally, we minimize human contact and release animals back into the wild as quickly as possible. But Nova's case is complicated. We don't think she can be fully released." "What does that mean for her?" Sarah asked carefully. Stephen stepped forward. "We're developing a new program, a wildlife ambassador initiative. Some animals, for various reasons, can't be released back into the wild. They'll stay in a protected environment and help educate the public. Nova would be the perfect candidate." Sarah was impressed. "That sounds amazing. She could help people understand wildlife better." Robert nodded. "Her rescue story has already sparked a lot of interest. Through her, we could raise awareness about conservation. Funding for the program is secured thanks to the attention her story has received." Stephen smiled. "And as a little bonus, Nova's image will soon be on the new license plates for the Wildlife Conservation Program." Sarah laughed. "So she's going to be a real celebrity." She turned to Nova, who was still watching attentively. "More than that," Robert said, "she could change the way we think about wildlife." Sarah stepped closer to the fence. Nova leaned in curiously and let out a soft sound, almost like a greeting. In that moment, Sarah felt an unexpected connection to the young bobcat. She knew Nova's story was far from over. Months had passed since Nova had captured the world's attention. Today was a special day, the official opening of the Texas Wildlife Ambassador Center. Sarah stood in the crowd watching as visitors entered the new facility, a modern space designed for animals that couldn't return to the wild but still played a vital role in conservation. The center was spacious, with large enclosures, educational displays, and observation stations offering a unique glimpse into the world of wildlife. At the heart of this new facility, Nova had her own specially designed habitat. Her story had helped make the center a reality, and now she was to be its first official ambassador. Sarah felt honored to be there as a representative of her department, but she also knew she was there for personal reasons. Since her first encounter with Nova, her perspective on animals had changed. On a stage in the center of the grounds, Robert gave a speech. "6 months ago, Nova not only saved my life, but also proved that the connection between humans and animals is far more complex than we thought. Thanks to her, we found new ways to protect wildlife and educate people about it." The audience applauded, and Sarah noticed even Stephen Mitchell looked moved. What had started as an experiment had now taken on a deeper meaning. After the ceremony, Sarah had the chance to see Nova up close. In her spacious habitat, the young bobcat lounged on a rock, her golden eyes fixed on the crowd. When she saw Sarah, she stood and slowly approached the fence. "She recognizes you," Robert said with a smile. "She has an extraordinary memory." Sarah stepped closer. "Who would have thought that little bobcat who blocked traffic would have such an impact on all of us?" Robert nodded. "Nova reminds us that wild animals aren't just driven by instinct. She's proven they can learn, adapt, and interact with us without losing their wildness." Stephen added, "And more importantly, she inspires people. Just today, we've had dozens of inquiries from schools wanting to introduce wildlife programs. Conservation now has a face." Sarah looked at Nova and felt a sense of closure. "I think she's taught us as much as we've taught her." Nova watched Sarah with her golden eyes, then let out a soft sound. Not fearful, not demanding, but almost familiar. It was a sign that she too felt this connection. As the sun set over Texas, casting warm colors over the enclosure, Sarah knew Nova's story wasn't just a stroke of luck. It was a story of trust, instinct, and a bridge between two worlds, the human and the wild. In the weeks following the opening, Nova's impact became even clearer. The center saw record numbers of visitors. Children, adults, and conservation enthusiasts flocked to hear the story of the extraordinary bobcat. School groups participated in workshops, learning about protecting Texas wildlife, and Nova's name was always mentioned as a symbol of the unexpected connections between humans and nature. Sarah visited the center often. She felt a bond with Nova, even though she knew the bobcat was still a wild animal. But every time she approached the enclosure, Nova would watch her with those intelligent golden eyes as if remembering. One day, as Sarah stood beside Robert, watching Nova in her habitat, she said, "Do you think Nova could ever have been fully wild?" Robert thought for a moment. Maybe not, but maybe she doesn't need to be. Sometimes animals, like people, have a different path than the one we expect. Sarah nodded, looking at Nova. And that path has changed so many lives. Robert smiled. Yes, and who knows how many more she'll touch. As Nova stretched out on her rock, half closing her eyes against the setting sun, Sarah knew her story was far from over. Nova wasn't just a bobcat who had enabled an extraordinary rescue. She was an ambassador for a new way of coexisting with wildlife, a symbol of the balance we must strive to protect. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories like this. Thanks to our valued viewers, we continue to improve every day. Please subscribe and give this video a thumbs up.